Welcome! You are looking for a dress watch and cannot decide if you should buy a Japanese citizen Tsuyosa automatic watch or a Swiss-made Tissot Gentleman Powermatic 80 Silicium? Then you found the right video. In this video I will analyze all the differences between the Tsuyosa versus the Gentleman Silicium. This is not a hands-on video, but in this comparison I will try to compare all color and design variations of the two watch collections, so you get a good overview of the Tsuyosa and Tissot Gentleman collection. First I will talk about the technical details and the movement differences, and then I will compare all the design differences between the Citizen Tsuyosa versus the Tissot Gentleman watches. Before I start, I want to ask you to consider using my Amazon shopping links below in the video description. You do not have any downside by using them, but I get a small commission for referring customers. But it does not matter what exactly you buy, but if you use my link, I get a small commission. Maybe before I start the comparison itself, I want to mention that the Tissot Gentleman is available with quartz movement here on the left and the automatic self-winding Powermatic 80 Silicium movement here on the right. Since the Citizen Tsuyosa is only available as an automatic watch, I'm going to compare it to the automatic Tissot, not the quartz models. Although, if you consider the price, it might make more sense to compare the Tsuyosa to the battery-powered Gentleman quartz models. The Tissot Gentleman Powermatic 80 Silicium is almost 3 times as expensive. But of course, many design differences between the automatic Gentleman versus the Citizen Tsuyosa should be almost identical to the Gentleman quartz models. Okay, let's compare the technical details and the movements first. Let's compare the case of the Citizen Tsuyosa versus the Tissot Gentleman Silicium. Both the Tsuyosa and the Gentleman have a round shape case. According to Citizen, the Tsuyosa uses stainless steel for the case. The Tissot Gentleman uses 316L steel, which is supposed to be more corrosion resistant compared to normal stainless steel. If we compare the weight of the watches with stainless steel wristbands, the Tsuyosa weighs 138 grams, the Tissot Gentleman 164 grams, so the Tsuyosa is slightly lighter. If you want the look without the weight, you could opt for a Gentleman titanium quartz model, which only weighs 90 grams. If we compare the thickness, it's 11.7 millimeters for the case of the Citizen Tsuyosa and 11.5 millimeters for the case of the automatic Tissot Gentleman. So you will not notice any difference there. 0.2 millimeters is too small to notice. If you want a thinner watch, the Gentleman quartz models are only 8.5 millimeters thick. So it's much thinner compared to the automatic watches. Let's compare the water resistance. The Citizen Tsuyosa is water resistant only up to 5 bars or 50 meters or 166 feet. The Tissot Gentleman is water resistant up to 10 bars or 100 meters or 330 feet. So with the Tissot Gentleman you can go twice as deep, but who's going diving with a dress watch anyway? Both the Citizen Tsuyosa and the automatic Tissot Gentleman models offer open case backs, so you can admire the self-winding movement. So let's compare the movements themselves. Let's start with the power reserve of the movements. The Tsuyosa has a 40-hour power reserve. The Tissot Gentleman Powermatic 80 Silicium, as the name implies, has an 80-hour power reserve if fully wound. What might be important is that the Tissot Gentleman has a silicon alloy balance spring, as the name implies, the silicium in the name. This alloy is very resistant to effects of electromagnetic fields and temperature changes. Maybe you think that normal electric devices and airport security checks are not a big problem, but consider wireless charging and induction cooking ovens. Those use strong magnetic fields. If you use those technologies regularly, a normal automatic watch might have problems keeping proper time. Okay, so what about the accuracy of the movement? Well, according to Citizen, the Tsuyosa has an accuracy of plus and minus 20 seconds per day. I could not find official infos about the accuracy of the Tissot Gentleman, but it is supposed to be around plus and minus between 5 and 10 seconds per day. So it loses half the time compared to the Tsuyosa. If you use wireless charging and induction cooking, the difference might be even higher. It is very difficult to show any differences of the crystal. Citizen says they use sapphire glass. Tissot Gentleman uses domed, scratch-resistant sapphire crystal with the addition of an anti-reflective coating. So the overall technical specifications of the Tissot Gentleman seem much better compared to the Tsuyosa. But of course it also costs almost 3 times as much for the Swiss-made high quality. So what do you think? Are those technical differences important for you? Please leave a comment below. And now let's compare the design differences. It is somewhat difficult to compare the design of the Citizen Tsuyosa to the Tissot Gentleman because there are many variations of the Tsuyosa and Gentleman watches. Here we see 2 different Tsuyosa watches with blue dial on the left and the Tissot Gentleman with blue dial and cross lines on the right. So where should we start the comparison? Let's start with the stainless steel bracelet. The links of both wristbands are polished in the center and brushed on the outside. The links of the Tsuyosa are more rounded, rather a half circle shape, and there is more space between the individual links. The links of the Gentleman are more oblong squares, which are rounded on the outside, and there is almost no visible space between the individual links. In my opinion, the Tissot Gentleman wristband looks better, but let me know what you think below in the comments. You can easily see the difference between the clasp of the Tsuyosa compared to the Tissot Gentleman. The Tsuyosa uses a huge obvious clasp. The Tissot PRX has a concealed clasp. I think the concealed clasp looks great, but the advantage of the Tsuyosa clasp, it allows small adjustment of the wristband size. The concealed clasp of the Tissot Gentleman does not allow that. If we compare the edges of the watch case outside the bezel diameter, the case of the Tsuyosa and Gentleman look to be brushed stainless steel, but the effect is stronger on the Tsuyosa. The Tissot Gentleman is more rounded and smooth. The Tsuyosa has a sharp edge where it starts to taper down to the wristband. I also want to point out the very different crown position of the Citizen Tsuyosa watches and the Tissot Gentleman. The Citizen watches have a recessed crown at the 4 o'clock position. The crown of the Tissot is at the 3 o'clock position. If we compare the bezels, both the Tsuyosa and Gentleman have wide polished bezels. The bezel of the Tissot Gentleman seems wider and flatter compared to the Citizen Tsuyosa. If you look to the left and right of the bezels, with the Tsuyosa on the left you can see the case. With the Gentleman on the right you cannot see the case on the sides, because the bezel is so wide. I would say that the Tissot Gentleman looks a little bit bigger because of the bezel. Okay, then let's talk about the dial. All 3 watches here have a blue dial, but at the same time all 3 dials are very different. The Tsuyosa on the left has a sunburst dial. The Tsuyosa in the center has a kind of gradient dial with a wall rendering structure effect. The Tissot Gentleman with leather wristband on the right has a sunburst dial with cross lines. Basically all stainless steel Gentleman watches have a sunburst style dial, either with or without the cross lines. There are 2 open heart models which look very different, of course, as you can see here in the center. Tissot offers the Gentleman watches also with 18K gold bezel, either with yellow gold or with rose gold. Some of those models have a gradient dial. Citizen Tsuyosa watches are of course not available with any real gold bezels. Citizen offers the Tsuyosa with much more dial variations. Here on the left you see a gradient red dial. This model has a rose gold colored case and bracelet, but it's really only some gold color, no real gold, since the price is the same as for the other stainless steel models. Moving to the right, there is a new model from 2024 with textured guilloche-like pattern. The dial here has a small second subdial and no date field. On the right you see 2 models which are also new in 2024, but only for the European market. The one with vertical brushed salmon colored dial and the green dial which looks like camouflage, but which I think is supposed to be a Japanese garden. Moving on to the elements of the dial, there's not much to say about the logo signature below the 12 o'clock position. It simply states the names of the 2 brands. Well, below the word Tissot you can also see the year 1853 when the company was founded. Between the center and the 6 o'clock position you can see the word Automatic on the Citizen watches. On the Tissot Gentleman you can see the writing Powermatic 80 Silicium. I'm not mentioning the cross lines on the Gentleman watches since some models have them and some don't. It's rather a dial background element. If you compare the hour and minute hands, the Tissot Gentleman seems to have slightly wider hands compared to the Tsuyosa. They are also more pointed at the ends compared to the flatter tips of the Tsuyosa hour and minute hands. But if we compare the hour markers, the rectangular baton markers of the Citizen watches seem more massive and take up much more space on the dial. The 12 and 6 o'clock position even have 2 baton markers. The index hour markers of the Tissot are not much smaller compared to the Tsuyosa, but slightly cone-shaped and look more elegant. All hour markers of the Tissot Gentleman have the same size. There are no differences for 6 nor 12 o'clock. Outside the diameter of the main hour markers, the Tsuyosa has additional square hour markers and the minute markers right against the edge of the case. The minute markers of the Gentleman are at the same diameter as the main hour markers, and there are much more minute markers compared to the Tsuyosa. But those are not right next to the edge of the case. Between the minute markers and the bezel there is a mostly empty ring with additional round hour markers. Let's compare the date window of the Citizen Tsuyosa versus the Tissot Gentleman Powermatic 80 Silicium. Most Tsuyosa have a date magnification, here an example in the center. But there are some new 2024 models which do not have the magnification, here on the left. If we compare the date window itself, you can see that the date window of the Citizen watches are very minimalistic. Basically, there's only a square hole cut out of the dial. Well, actually the model on the left has some kind of angular cut, so it looks a bit better than the date window in the center. The date window of the Gentleman Silicium, however, has a 3-dimensional silver frame around the date. If you look closely, the 3 o'clock hour marker of the Citizen Tsuyosa is just half the size of the other hour markers to accommodate the date window, or rather to have a little space between the hour marker and the date window. But the Tissot Gentleman seems to cut off the 3 o'clock hour marker too. The hour marker is slightly shorter and there is almost no space between it and the frame of the date window. Obviously, on the dial of the Tissot Gentleman you can see the words Swiss made at the bottom of the dial, which does not appear on the Citizen watches because they are made in Japan, of course. Okay, I think those are all the main differences and all the main varieties between the Citizen Tsuyosa and the Tissot Gentleman collection. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel and consider using my shopping links below in the video description. You don't have any downside, but I get a small commission for referring customers, no matter which watch you buy there. I hope this video helped you to choose between the Citizen Tsuyosa and the Tissot Gentleman Powermatic 80 Silicium. Which one do you prefer? Will you buy one or the other? Please let me know in the comments.